Guys, welcome back. Sound Design Hangout. And today we are getting back to, I don't know if I should say the bread and butter of Ableton, or I guess of what we do on this channel, which is sound design in the more traditional Ableton synthesizers like analog, operator, wavetable, and today we are going to focus on analog. Now, I've done a lot of analog on this channel, and but today, and I want to start kind of like a beginner level and then go all the way to advanced, because there's some really cool features. I would honestly just refer to them as like advanced features that your average person probably is not going to play with when they open up analog. If one should even be so lucky to be able to open up analog and know what to do. So, I'm going to throw a limiter down here just to catch any peaks. And an EQ8. Can really just leave it how it is. We've just got this cutting out any of the lowest lows. Just as a force of habit, I have that on there. Normally I'll throw a compressor on as well, just with a tiny bit of compression. Little bit of threshold. Attack right around there, just so it lets through the transients, it doesn't compress them. At least too much. So, we're starting with analog. And we're going to start slow, and then we're going to get to basically the advanced features and show you some other cool things along the way. So right now, when you look at analog, you've got this box here, oscillator 1. It's yellow, which means it's turned on. See down here, you got oscillator 2, it's gray, it's turned off. And so this oscillator, which can either be a square wave, a saw wave, which you're going to use a square or saw pretty much every time. They sound very similar, and they give you lots of harmonics, which you then sculpt with filters. There's no filtering you can even do on a sine wave because it's just the fundamental. If you want a real clean sound, simple sound, maybe all you need is a sine wave, and then you will typically get a noise oscillator, which basically allows you to make like atmospheric ambient music or percussion sounds. So when you're doing sound design in analog, or in it, which is a subtractive synthesis, it uses subtractive synthesis. It's a subtractive synthesizer. The reason why subtractive is in the name is because you will take a bright waveform. So the square and the saw is very, very bright. And then you use a filter, most commonly a low-pass filter of some sort, a 24 or 12-pole low-pass filter, and you subtract frequencies. And then when you add them back, you can get those kind of sounds. And then when you're trying to make punchy sounds, you then put an envelope on this filter frequency while it's on low pass, and basically you take it from open to full or to down very quickly, and it gives you this sort of a sound. So again, we're on the basics. You've got an oscillator. It then gets fed into a filter, manipulated by said filter. And then you go to the volume. See how it says amplifier, volume. Think amplifier, think volume. And what will the volume do over time? How much volume? And that'll be controlled here. And then you hear it. as I'm sure you've been noticing, right now we're clicked on the amplifier area, or shell, as I believe it's called. And you've got this display down here. So when I click on the filter, it will change. And then same thing with the oscillator. Now, for the most part, sorry, for some reason I feel all dried out. It's like I brushed my teeth and I'm all like, I don't know. Bear with me here, this is gonna be great. So, you've got a second oscillator down here, which you don't need to use, but you can. And I'll show you some pretty great stuff. You've got a second filter, and you've got a second volume envelope. And where things really start to get interesting is when you notice this little section here, that you can route this oscillator 1 to filter 2, and you can also route certain amounts that go into this filter 1 into filter 2. And it allows you to do some really unique things. Now, if you were just starting to get your head around subtractive synthesis, and you're starting to get good, reliable sounds because you're watching my various tutorial videos, by all means, get the filters down, get it down on a basic level, and then when you start exploring more, okay, what is oscillator 2, a second filter, another volume envelope, what's that going to do for me? It'll all start to make sense. That's why we're building up. So you have this filter here. And, oh, by the way, I should probably take a quick timeout and let you know that my video, which I record with my iPhone, it might cut out because my storage is full. In fact, if you've watched the past 2 SDHOs, it was cutting out. Maybe it's cut out already. It says I only have like 3 gigabytes available, but it said that, and then I found some of the SDHOs that were still on my phone that were like hours long. So I like deleted them all. So I deleted 7 hours worth of video, and it still says like 3 gigabytes remaining, which who knows? Maybe it wants to make me do stuff. I don't feel like deleting stuff off of it yet. So if I'm already cut off, hopefully it doesn't impact any of the video or any of your enjoyment or learning. So really quickly, for the most part, you're going to use a low-pass filter. And you have band-pass filters, notch filters, which are really cool. They sound amazing when modulated. High-pass filters, you don't use as much. And then Foreman filters, which give kind of like a robot-y, like human vocal kind of sound, which if you want that sound, if you want that effect, for the most, you can go with it. But for the most part, you're using these low-pass filters. And to give you an idea of what it is, so you can visualize this here, if we come into audio effects and we go for a, where is it? Auto filter. This is the low-pass filter. This is what this is. Low-pass filter means let the lows pass. Like, as I'm sure you know, the lowest filters are here. Lowest frequencies are here. So that's what we're doing. And it's what you're going to use the majority of the time. And by the way, this octave control, just to get a little bit bassier. Oh, look, 111. So you use a low-pass filter to start high, and you put an envelope on it to swoop it down so you get punchy sounds. You also get that nice wubby sound. And it's just a good way to cut out some of these ridiculously high frequencies, you know? Like, I don't want anything that's going to be that bright the whole time. Okay, so you're going to use it almost all the time. I wanted you to be able to visualize that. And then one other thing I want you to visualize is what it looks like up here. You probably already know this, but we really need to just do a good job. Wait, why is that not updating? Oh, I think it's because it has to be here. I'm going to turn off max. So see that? You're subtracting harmonics. Now you're adding them back in. So yeah, this is what a low pass filter looks like. When you're in a filter here, you're probably... Filter is really how you're controlling the harmonics over time, which is sound design. You're mostly going to be using the low pass filter. And I'm showing you it over here just so you can visualize it before we get deeper. So the next filter is the high pass filter. It says let through all the high frequencies up to this amount. So if I play a note, I'm only hearing these highs. Now, I don't really use the high pass filter much because like I want as much bass lower frequencies as possible, you know, most of the time. So I don't really have a need for this. And I don't think a lot of people really do either. I mean, think about it. If you open it up, I mean, that's kind of cool, I guess. But I don't know. I don't really need it. I find really the only times I tend to use high pass filters is when I'm using like a sampler. And I've got like a sample, maybe it's like a drum sample, and it's a sample other than a kick. And I want to sort of like maximize, like boost some of its lower frequencies. And so you could come in here, throw on a filter drive. So yeah, you're probably not going to use high pass very often, but experiment. And then you've got band pass. So what is it doing? Like, it's very wah-wah pedally. I would use that for that kind of an effect. You could put a lot of different ones here. It sounds good with like white noise. But again, we're cutting out these lower lows. So if you're like, when you're thinking about your sound, you want to make sure you're not losing any low frequencies. You probably wouldn't use it too much. What I would do is I would actually come into here. I would group the auto filter. I would create another chain, literally just create train and just call it dry. So I don't lose any of, and I would call this, band pass, because what I want is I don't want to lose. So like right now, if I turn this off, I got all the frequencies. If I add this in, well, I'm not. See, I'm still getting that. In fact, this dry one, I'll throw another auto filter just to cut out the very high stuff. So we can modulate that, and then we got the band pass. And the way you give that movement is you come over here, add some of this LFO. Something I think sounds cool. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't even know if it really... Where is that redux? Where's the redux? I think if you put a redux after a auto filter with a band pass, it sounds kind of cool. Yeah, it does that thing. I mean, look, you turn the redux off, but you put that redux at the right settings, and you get that jai that you heard in all that like Skrillex, like earlier-ish dubstep, bro step, whatever it was, and you had this redux just right after it, and all of a sudden. Pretty crazy. Delete. Let's go back to auto filter. And then you've got this notch filter, which I never really thought much of because I'm like, why do I want to like only remove this little band? Because it just gives you great modulation. Cool. And then you've got what's called a morphing filter. So again, if you want like crazy effects. So anyways, guys, yeah, we're back where we started. Low pass filter, everything open. 2412. It's really just how steep it is. Awesome. So hopefully that was informative. You know, if I just started like going crazy with analog, just wouldn't be good, because like I found that the tutorials that I like the most, because I mean that's how I know everything Ableton. There was a time when literally all I did was watch tutorials. Make sure you use Ableton as well. Don't just watch tutorials. But so I wanted to explain that it's subtractive synthesis. You're going to be using a low pass filter probably 8 or 9 out of 10 times, but wanted you to be able to know what these were like, but to also visualize them. That's why we took out that auto filter. Anytime you're working with a synthesizer in Ableton Live, you're going to have these filters built in. So why would you use auto filter? Well, if you just want to have a bunch more filters you can chuck on any track, that's fine. But also if you just have like if you just have a piece of audio, if you just have like a piece of audio, you know, and you want to filter, well, what do? I mean, you could throw it in a sampler and use that filter, but you've got this sort of like free running filter. That's what you would use. So there we go. So here's our sound here. Here's the harmonics. We are cutting everything out, this low pass filter, from 20,000 over to, I guess, 1.7 thousand. Because we want a lot of harmonics, that means we're either going to use a square or a saw if we want it to be harmonic. So if I click on saw, you can see how it does. So it does the fundamental, which is this note, and then it does every other harmonic. Square is going to sound similar, but it's going to have the fundamental, but it's going to skip every other harmonic. So it's odd. It's the odd harmonics, starting with the fundamental, whereas the saw is all of them. It's very similar. So truthfully, I feel squares sound better, so I use them most of the time. But what we will see is that we've got the ability to do pulse width modulation, which you can't do with a saw wave. So to be honest with you, it's almost like you can just stick to squares if you really need to. And look at this pulse width. Have you heard that sound before? And what's really cool is because when you modulate that, so like when we modulate this, we're like adding and removing frequencies. So when it goes lower, you know, when it goes up, you know what I mean? Like you're losing the higher frequencies that you may want when it goes lower. But with this pulse width modulation, which is cool with that, also like wavetable, when you modulate the wavetable position in wavetable, it doesn't actually like subtract away harmonics. So you're like still left with all this harmonic-y goodness, higher harmonics that don't just get like cut out. Now you don't have to modulate that. Like literally if you just wanted like, you feel like, oh, okay. If you're just like plucking notes, okay, maybe I like the sound down here better. So when it's at 50%, because truthfully, this isn't even a square wave, it's a pulse wave. And a pulse wave either has an up position, which is all the way up, or down position, all the way down. And if it's 50, that means the same up position on is the same as the down position, which is off. And because it's 50-50, it's a, you know, symmetrical square wave. Any other amount makes it either longer at the top, which then makes it shorter on the bottom, and vice versa, depending on which way you go. And that's technically a rectangle wave, but the all-encompassing, or it might just be pulse wave. But the all-encompassing term for this is actually pulse wave, which is very interesting. If we were to do sine, we only get the fundamental frequency. I know it shows this down here, but really it's not. Nothing happens with this other than volume for the frequency. If you wanted like a sound like that, come into amp, make it a little bit punchier, give it a nice longer release. It's got a punchy start to it, doesn't it? And then you could chuck a nice little reverb. So I don't ever want to suggest that the sine wave is boring and you can't get cool stuff out of it. I definitely don't want to suggest that at all. Let's cut out some lows, cut out some of the highs. Let's take a power station in Berlin. Let's go to ambience and small rooms, see what this does. A smaller reverb space. Yeah, sounds pretty good. I like that. Give this amp a little attack. Yay, we added oscillator 2. Let's put it on sine. And I want to detune one. But I'm going to put this up to octave 1 because I want them to be the same. And now I'm going to hold it down. Now hear what happens when I detune. But what gets really interesting is if we put these on a more harmonic. Listen to what we have. First, I want the octave it plays to be down. So I'm going to turn oscillator 2 off. Now, just so you know, when we added this oscillator 2, see how it says filter 1, filter 2? This says the output of this oscillator 2 is going to go to filter 1, and this filter 1 goes into amp 1, and that's what we hear. We don't hear any of this filter 2 or amp 2 because they are not turned on. So I'm going to turn oscillator 2 off, and we're going to have what we had before. I'll get rid of the Convolution Reverb Pro for now. Now, if we turn on oscillator 2, square wave, just like at the top, down an octave, we're just going to get more volume. Oh no, I messed up. See how I have this little bit of a detune amount? I'm going to put it back at 0 and listen to how it's static. It's just like sound. We add oscillator 2. It's the same thing. But as soon as we detune just 1, listen to how it goes from static to movement. And remember I told you that movement, that modulation, and that just comes from slightly detuning an oscillator. So this was a sound that you would get with subtractive synthesizers and is a sound that you do to give movement to the sound. So I'm going to play it, and then I'm going to just add the littlest bit of detune, just to 1, and it's going to give it this like wonderful like movement that's very subtle, but it just sounds so much better. So that's why when we're thinking about and we're living in this sound design world, it's all about modulation, especially with sounds that are meant to just play forever, which are like sustained sounds, legato sounds, the sounds that I like the most because, you know, like I make a lot of ambient music, so I want things to just play and do their thing. So I'm going to play it. It's going to be static. And then I'm going to add just a little bit of detune to either one and listen to how wonderful it gets. Ready? And that has nothing to do with the filter. It's all to do with the way that these oscillators are interacting with each other. See how rich that sounds? So you might think, oh, you can modulate. So that brings us to our next point. We'd modulate this frequency a little bit. See how we got that wonderful sound? So here's how we would do it. We would click this LFO1, probably put it on a slow rate. You know, this is probably fine where it is. And you go into filter and see this LFO. You have to route this LFO down here. So now listen to what we get. We will be getting essentially this. Now this won't move. It'll move under the hood, but we won't get to see this move, but you'll be able to hear its effect. So I'm not going to add any LFO yet, but I'm just going to let you show it here, and then I'm going to add it, and you'll see it does the same thing. Okay, so now I'm going to add it. Now that's all well and cool, but I'm removing that because I want to see it move. And so that's why a lot of times I don't even really use the LFOs anymore, the inbuilt LFOs, because even though this LFO is moving this filter frequency and whatever else we route to, which we can route it to resonance, because the resonance, the resonance on the filter, especially in analog, actually adds a lot of character to the sound, whereas in other synthesizers that aren't based on like voltages, electric, the electrics of the voltages. See that? So I'd rather use the LFO. And right now it's at 1 hertz, way too fast. The depth is going to tell you it's already going to be too quick. And you have to click map, then click this. Now I don't want it to go up that high, you know what I mean? So this LFO is doing the same thing. It's just we couldn't see the visual feedback. Now, of course, you want to develop your ears. You know what I mean? Of course, you want to develop your ears. But like sometimes I know I don't want it to go much above 2,000 hertz, right? So I don't need to be like, okay, so definitely 2,000. You know what I mean? I'd rather just see it. So it's all preference. Still, the depth is too much. I don't want it to move that much. I want it to kind of... I don't really want it to go much below 500. Still too much depth. I just want a little bit. And what's really nice is you can add some jitter so it's not predictable. It'll kind of hang and move. Wonderful. I'm just adjusting the volume settings, which says takes 66 milliseconds to go from no volume up to the highest point of volume here. And then over the decay down to a sustain amount of 0.91. That's how you get it to stay open when you hold down a note. Because if sustain is down, it's just going to go down. Right? You need a sustain. Unless you're going for like a shorter sound, you know, like a sound that's meant to be played very melodically, like, you know what I mean? You're not holding those notes down long. But that's, I'm more or less to show these modulation parameters and how they influence your sound over time. You need to have a volume envelope because you can do all of and this was one of the first things I learned when I started to get to learn, because I was like, why can't I get a long sound? When I hold it, it's long. And I didn't know, like, oh, it's because your volume envelope, there's no sustain. So I would have this short little envelope on the volume, and I couldn't figure out why my filter envelope wasn't opening up and closing properly. It's because no matter what, my sound wasn't going to be longer than like 200 milliseconds or whatever I had it set in the amp parameters with respects to the sustain and decay. So we've introduced, so you're always going to have oscillator 1, filter 1 and amplifier 1 turned on. I'm just going to turn off this LFO because I don't need it. And you would add oscillator 2 very predictably if you wanted that oscillator detune effect, which makes it wider. It makes it sound better, in my opinion. It gives it that wonderful sound. And then that gets fed into the filter 1, manipulated as you would want, probably with a low pass filter. You might want to modulate filter frequency, even though you already have the wonderful modulation as it is. You don't have to keep adding modulations. And in fact, we're going to add so many modulations that I don't even know if it'll even sound good. So you can pick and choose. So in this LFO device, if you click this button up here, I want to map it to resonance. But I don't want resonance to get this freaky high. So I'm going to turn this setting down. And now we've got a little bit of modulation on our resonance. So remember I told you can come into here and we can map this to the pulse width. See how it's moving? So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm actually gonna turn it off. I want my own LFO because I don't want it to be locked to the way these are moving. Even though like I can choose, I want it to go all the way kind of up like that. I want to know what that sounds like. So I'm going to add another LFO so I can have my own specific parameters, and I'm going to map it to take down the depth. So this is pulse width modulation. Give a little jitter. This jitter thing is amazing. Just adjusting some parameters. So it's almost overkill a little bit, all of this modulation. So like there'd be no reason why not to go into oscillator 2. And then also map the pulse width. So without. And like change it up a little bit. It's nice. Now, what do I want to do? Just easy. I'm going to just to cut off a little bit. Look at this crazy thing over here. I'm actually going to go into this pole one and make it a sharper pole. Remember we had those like steeper poles? This would be like a... Yeah, boy, that's like really bright. So now, filter 2. Now, when I'm thinking about filter 2, which I want to play it, to my understandings, so here's what's happening. My understandings is if filter 2 is activated, the only way you will hear it, is if amp 2 is activated. So I'm going to turn off filter 2 and I'm going to hit some notes. And now nothing should, if I'm correct, nothing should happen when I click filter 2. No difference. But once I do amp 2, see, that won't happen if I do this. So I'm going to add amplifier 2, and I'm going to do one of those notch poles I told you about. So we can do that. In fact, let's open up one of these LFOs and map it to this. Okay, that's a little bit too intense. Maybe I might want to map the first LFO here. You want to check this volume envelope. I'm going to give it an attack so it sort of fades in. You can pan them differently. You could even do that. Map the pan. So you're getting more of a stereo width. Now this filter doesn't need to even go. We can adjust the amount that it's sending. Notice how it sounds different. You could even come into here and map this amount, see if it sounds good. Why does that keep happening? That's annoying. I'm going to actually give this more of a fade in. And then you've got these amounts. Like, check these out. So like maybe we want oscillator 1, all of it's going to filter 1, but what if we start giving some to filter 2? Notice how it's getting buzzier? Because this notch lets through so much. Hell, let's modulate that. Too much. I think this one's slower. Take this octave down, see if that does anything cool. Take the detune down a little bit. Maybe map this to this one. No, it's too much. Could even map the panning amount to the top one. Too much. I like the slower one. Even the volume level. Dude, it stopped. Why did it stop? I'm hitting buttons and nothing's happening. Let's take this one away. Oh wow, that's so crazy. You could come back in and you can adjust things. Okay, let's do a slower depth. Take the rate down. You can see all them going so much faster. Wow, that was pretty cool. So, it's a lot of good stuff. So I guess that just kind of shows you. I'm just going to turn these off. I feel like analog needs a break. It's like, dude, can you imagine trying to process all that stuff? And look, listen. Listen how boring that sounds right now, because it's static. Doesn't sound as good, but then you start adding some of this. Oh, and then I can't finish without letting you know this area. I mean, we don't need this, but you can add vibrato and unison. If you wanted to have a little bit of glide between your notes, you could hit glide and yeah, it's hard to hear it. And then unison just gives more of a spatial. We're adding too much stuff, so this might sound awful actually. It's almost like we're adding so many things that I don't think it can really keep up, and I kind of feel bad for it almost. So in any event, play around with unison and vibrato. If you want to get some glide, you would get it down here. We're doing so much that we really don't even need anymore. Like I love putting choruses on analog, but like we're almost getting a sort of, you don't have to map every parameter in the book. You know what I mean? So I hope you enjoyed that. I think we got pretty deep there. Some things I would do is I would probably have filter 1 be like the notch filter, like reverse these, and have like filter 1 be the notch filter, because the notch filter lets through the lowest lows and the highest highs, and then the notch just notches out that, and it gives it that really good sort of like sound to it. And then if you feed that input from filter 1 into filter 2, which is like a low pass, and then you're filtering out those super high highs, and then you still have that movement on the low pass, and then I guess that output could go into amplifier 2. You don't really need the amplifier 1 unless you wanted to release some of the sound from filter 1 into amplifier 1 as well. But you would be getting some of that high frequency if you're okay with that. So that's stuff to do. I bypassed the LFO. You can route to so many stuff, but like you're not going to see the parameters move. I think they're going to eventually update analog and operator to where you can see that. And my reason being is if we come over here to wavetable, if you add the LFO to the filter, so if I go LFO, add it to filter, it will move if you play a note. So I'm going to record enable. See? If I add some LFO to oscillator 1 position, so yeah, I don't think it does it to everyone. So if I want to like move this, actually, I think it probably will. Warp. Yeah, but you can, yeah. So anyways, that's what's really cool about wavetable, but analog. So we did all that. You're making sounds with filters. You really have no choice in subtractive synthesis other than to basically you control your sound or you control the harmonics with filters. So if you're using a filter to get this sound, you might want to have 2 filters. You might want to mix different filter types. You're probably always going to have some sort of a low pass filter, and you can get really good effects with throwing in a notch filter and modulating that, and then also a bandpass filter, because the bandpass filter, as we saw, it got rid of a lot of the low frequencies. A lot of times you don't want to lose those low frequencies, but you're already getting the low frequencies coming in through the low pass filter here in filter 1. So you can send that off to amp 1, but then send some of it, the filter 1, into that bandpass, and then get the nice modulation of the bandpass coming through, and it'll come through this amplifier 2 envelope. Because if you want to hear any of the output of filter 2, you have to check amplifier 2. So yeah, you've got these oscillators. You can add some sub to beef them up, but we can control that with the octave. You don't even have to use filter frequency modulation with an LFO. You can do that nice detune effect. To be honest, as long as you got a beautifully delicious sounding modulation, it can sound so good, and you really don't have to do much else. Like we literally could have just cut out any of the highs we wanted with filter 1 and just had that really nice detune with these 2 square waves, and that could have been it. We could have thrown a chorus on there, been done. Similarly, we could have not done the detune or done it, but got more of our wonderful modulation sound from pulse width, And then we've got the filter frequency, the resonance, also modulating. Frankly, it's too much. I was like, I don't even want to put a chorus on here. It's getting to be too much. That's why they say you don't want to throw the kitchen sink, but it's good to know. It's good to know that these are your possibilities. So it takes this device like analog, and if you just open up a default analog, you'd be like, oh my God, what's up with this? You know what I mean? We utilize these LFOs with all of these routing parameters, you know, just to like save space, you know. You can adjust the minimum and maximum amounts. The jitter's good. Smash a like if you liked this, if you found it useful, if you are part of the analog crew as we sail the high waters of the juicy analog plains. People like subtractive synthesizers because if you get like a hardware synthesizer, like a Moog, like the filters, because like there's actual electric voltages going into these things, and certain filters had little quirks about them with their voltages that would make them somewhat unpredictable, but also very bright and but like juicy, and like purely digital filters don't do that. So in a analog synthesizer, which is like a hardware synthesizer, obviously this is a software emulation of a subtractive analog synthesizer. It's trying to mimic that through various maths. So if you want like a video gamey kind of older school sound, why was it older school? Because when you heard older school video games, they would have like very, very primitive little synthesizers that were like built into like the Nintendo, the NES, you know what I mean? Or SNES, or Sega or whatever. And like you would maybe just have the ability to either just do a square wave, and maybe there would be a little bit of like pulse width modulation. Like I heard there were some video games where like literally the only sounds they had available was like a square wave with like a pulse width parameter, and maybe there was a way to remove some frequencies. I'm not sure, but it's very interesting. That's why like it'll just sound like it can be a bit video gamey. But if you take that analog and you're playing the lower bass frequencies, you're going to get juicy sounds. If you hold down a fistful of chords, fistful of notes, you're playing big old chords, especially you got some lower notes in there, you're going to get really warm, rich, amazing sounds. And if you know how to use these modulations and spread it across a stereo frequency, it's going to sound incredible. And then you drop some distortion on there. By the way, all these sounds we got without even using any distortion. We were able to get it rich and thick without having to just throw audio effects, because that's what I want you guys to learn, is because we don't need to just throw down some crappy synthesizer and chuck audio effects until it sounds good. No, we want to make it sound good right out of the synthesizer, and then the audio effects only sweetens the pie. So if you enjoyed all of that, smash a like, subscribe, write a comment, tell me what you would like to see. What am I not covering? What do you want to see? Keep in mind this is Ableton, so if you go, write a review on Serum, I'm like, no, because this is kind of part of the, nothing against plugins, but this is kind of the part of the thing. I want to show you that you can do everything in here, because we're not chasing hot plugins. We're not chasing sexy plugins. We're saying, oh, it's a wavetable synthesizer. Oh, well, I have a wavetable synthesizer in Ableton. It's wavetable. I know what wavetable is doing. I can get great sounds, oh, there's this really cool FM synthesizer. Oh, well, I know FM. I bet you I could get that in Operator. Why would an operator be able to do it? And when you know what FM does and you know how it's controlling your sound, that's when you start thinking. And as we've seen in previous videos, you can do everything subtractive and everything FM, all whilst in wavetable with all the other wavetable properties. We're going to get to operator first, or we're going to get to operator next and show the juicy parameters. And then I think we're going to get to wavetable and get into the more advanced parameters, and then get into, I believe, come full circle, go into sampler and simpler. Probably focus more on sampler just because sampler has more sound manipulation possibilities. But I know some of you might not have sampler, but then again, you wouldn't have had analog. So I love it. Love you guys. Take care.